The sound of boots slamming against the diner floor echoed like thunder. People froze, forks clinking on plates, as two police officers stormed toward the small booth near the window. An elderly black woman sat there, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. She wore a neat Sunday dress, her gray hair pinned back, her eyes tired but still sharp with dignity. "I told you to move," one of the officers barked, his face twisted with anger. "This booth isn't for people like you." Her voice trembled but remained steady. "I paid for my food. I'm not breaking the law. I'll finish my meal, and then I'll leave." The second officer smirked, as if her calm reply offended him more than if she had shouted. "Don't get smart with us." Before anyone could process what was happening, the first officer grabbed her arm roughly. The diner gasped. She winced in pain, but she did not scream. "Get up," he snapped. When she tried to stand on her own, he shoved her back down into the booth. The old woman's body hit the seat hard. Then, with shocking cruelty, both officers began shoving, yanking, and striking her as if she were a threat. Gasps filled the diner, but no one dared move. "Stop," she cried, her frail voice breaking under the blows. "I've done nothing wrong." The officers ignored her. One twisted her arm behind her back. The other pressed his hand against her chest, forcing her against the table. And then, in the chaos, as a hush of fear wrapped around the room, the woman's trembling hand reached into her purse. Everyone thought she might be looking for money, or maybe just trying to protect herself. But no. With slow, deliberate movement, she pulled out an old cell phone. Her hands shook as she tapped a single number. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a deep male voice answered. "Ma," the voice said. "What's wrong?" Her lips quivered as she whispered into the phone, just loud enough for the officers to hear, "They're hurting me, baby. They don't know who you are." The diner went still. The officers froze for half a second, confusion flickering across their faces. The woman's voice grew stronger, steadier, almost proud now. "I'm calling my son," she said, her eyes locking on the officers who had laid their hands on her. "And his Delta Force." The entire room fell into silence. The officers' grips faltered. Whispers rippled through the diner. And in that moment, before anyone could take their next breath, the door to the diner swung open. Hours earlier, the diner was just another quiet place in town. The kind of spot where farmers came in after church, teenagers shared milkshakes, and tired workers rested their bones after long shifts. The woman had walked in slowly, cane tapping against the tiled floor. Her name was Evelyn Carter, 72 years old. Her body ached from years of arthritis, but her spirit was unbroken. She had raised children through poverty, worked long hours cleaning houses, and endured racism her entire life. But she never bowed her head. That day, she simply wanted a meal. She found a seat near the window, enjoying the sunlight. A waitress approached her kindly, taking her order with a smile. For a brief moment, Evelyn felt peace. Then the peace shattered. The diner owner, a red-faced man with cold eyes, spotted her from across the room. He muttered under his breath as he marched toward the counter. "Why's she sitting there? That booth's for paying customers." "She is a paying customer," the waitress replied nervously. The owner scowled. "Not good enough. People like her bring trouble." Evelyn overheard, but she kept calm. She had lived long enough to know when hatred was aimed at her. Still, she wasn't about to give it power. She unfolded her napkin, straightened her back, and prepared to enjoy her food anyway. But the owner wasn't finished. He picked up the phone behind the counter and made a call. "Yeah," he said gruffly. "Got someone here making a scene. Might need some officers down here." Evelyn's heart sank. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't broken any law. Yet she knew what was coming. And just as she feared, within 10 minutes, the door chimed, and 2 officers walked in. Their eyes locked on her instantly. What followed was humiliation. They demanded she leave. They accused her of loitering. She calmly explained she had ordered and paid for her meal. They ignored her words. The tension grew, the officers' tempers rising. The other diners sat frozen, some whispering, some recording on their phones, but no one dared step in. And then came the moment of violence, the rough grabs, the shoves, the blows that sent shockwaves through the small diner. Now, as Evelyn's voice carried through that phone call, the air shifted. Something heavy, dangerous, and unstoppable was on its way. The officers exchanged nervous glances. The diner owner paled, realizing his simple act of cruelty might bring consequences far beyond anything he expected. And at that exact moment, as if the world itself were holding its breath, the door to the diner creaked open. Everyone turned. What they saw made their blood run cold. The bell above the diner door jingled as it swung wide open. Everyone turned their heads. The room fell into an almost unnatural silence, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. At first, all they saw was a shadow, a tall figure standing against the bright afternoon sun outside. The man stepped in slowly, his boots heavy against the floor. He wore a plain jacket, jeans, and dark glasses that hid his eyes. His presence filled the space, quiet but commanding, as if the air itself shifted to make way for him. The officers still had their hands on Evelyn, but they froze when the man's gaze landed on them. Something about the way he stood, the way he carried himself, it was enough to make anyone uneasy. "Ma," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Are you okay?" The elderly woman, bruised but holding her head high, gave a shaky nod. "I called you," she whispered. "They hurt me." The man's jaw tightened. He slowly pulled off his sunglasses, revealing piercing eyes that burned with controlled fire. "Let her go," he said calmly. The two officers exchanged looks. One scoffed, trying to mask his nerves. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" The man stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate, like someone who had nothing to prove but everything under control. He stood between his mother and the officers, his broad shoulders blocking her completely from their reach. "You don't want to know who I am," he said flatly. The diner owner, who had been smirking from behind the counter, slammed his hand against it. "Here's trespassing. Both of them are. Arrest them." The taller officer smirked and shoved a finger at the man's chest. "Listen, buddy, this doesn't concern you. Step aside before." In a flash, the man grabbed the officer's finger and twisted it just enough to make him wince without breaking it. The officer yelped in shock. The man leaned closer, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "I said, let her go." Gasps filled the diner. The officer staggered back, his face pale with a mix of anger and fear. The other officer reached for his radio, but before he could press the button, the man's voice cut through the room again. "My name is Marcus Carter. I'm her son. And I'm Delta Force." The words hit like a thunderclap. The diners whispered frantically. Even the waitress, who had watched helplessly moments earlier, covered her mouth in shock. The officers froze. Everyone knew what Delta Force meant: elite soldiers, trained for missions no one else could handle, men who lived and breathed discipline, skill, and unimaginable strength. The diner owner stammered, his face going pale. "He's bluffing. Don't listen to him. He's just some thug pretending." Marcus reached into his jacket slowly. The officers stiffened, hands twitching toward their holsters, but he pulled out only a badge. Not a police badge. Not military ID. It was something different, classified, official, the kind of proof that civilians rarely ever saw. He held it up for them to read. "Still think I'm bluffing?" The color drained from the officers' faces. For a moment, no one moved. Evelyn straightened her back, her chin lifted proudly. "You laid hands on the wrong woman," she said softly, her voice carrying louder than before. The silence was shattered when the taller officer, his pride wounded, snapped. "Doesn't matter who you are," he spat. "You don't threaten the police. That's assault." Marcus's eyes darkened. "Threaten," he repeated. His tone was calm, but it made the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand. "You think this is a threat? You haven't seen one yet." And with that, the officer drew his weapon. Screams erupted from the diners. Chairs scraped as people ducked under tables. Evelyn clutched her purse, her heart pounding. Marcus didn't flinch. He stared straight at the officer, calm as a stone, even with the gun pointed at his chest. "You don't want to do this," Marcus said quietly. The officer's hands shook. His partner shouted, "Put it away. Don't make this worse." But pride, anger, and fear mixed into something dangerous in the officer's eyes. His finger twitched near the trigger. The room held its breath. And then, the diner door swung open again. This time, it wasn't one figure. It was three. Men in plain clothes but carrying themselves like soldiers. Their eyes scanned the scene instantly, hands ready, alert, sharp. They locked on Marcus, then on the officers. The lead man spoke, his voice firm. "Carter, we got your call. What's the situation?" The officers froze in disbelief. Diners gasped again. Evelyn blinked, stunned. Marcus didn't move his gaze from the trembling officer's gun. "The situation," he said slowly, "is about to change." The entire diner froze. The officer's gun hand trembled, sweat dripping down his brow. Across from him, Marcus stood tall and steady, his eyes locked on the weapon as if it didn't scare him at all. Behind him, his mother Evelyn clutched her purse tightly, whispering silent prayers under her breath. Then, the three new men, Marcus's brothers-in-arms, moved forward. Their presence was electric, filling the room with the kind of authority that didn't need uniforms or badges. The leader, a bald man with a scar across his cheek, raised his hand calmly toward the officer. "Lower your weapon, son," he said firmly. "You're in way over your head." The officer stammered, his eyes darting between Marcus and the newcomers. "Who are you people?" "We're the reason you sleep safely at night," the scarred man said. "And right now, you're about 1 second away from making the biggest mistake of your life." His words were like thunder, heavy and undeniable. The other diners peeked out from behind their booths, wide-eyed. Some had their phones out, recording everything. The diner owner, who had once been smug and bold, now looked pale and shaky, unsure whether to hide or run. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. "This ends now."